magnificent culture that led the world was defeated by a tiny little European country, United Kingdom, which happened to have a much stronger military than China did. And then a lot of other European countries sort of piled it on to China and divided China into different areas, different foreign concessions they were called, where the European country was in control. What about the United States? The United States was called by one historian a junior partner in the exploitation of China, because we weren't in the lead. You know, that was England and France and Belgium and Germany and even Russia and Japan. You know, Japan not being a Western country, but they got in on it also. And the U.S. just sort of followed behind. They said, whatever privileges other countries get in China, we want those privileges too. So junior partner is one way of expressing that. And this was all done pursuant to what's called today, still called today, the Unequal Treaties. These were treaties that the British and other countries forced on the Qin Dynasty. Qin Dynasty was the last Chinese dynasty. Forced them to sign these treaties, giving foreigners special privileges in China in probably as many as 15 different major cities in China, and most of them port cities. It would be a foreign area. Foreigners were in control. There was something called extraterritoriality. That's a word that Chinese students have a problem with. There's so many syllables in it. And Chinese language only has one syllable or two syllables for every word. Those of you who studied Chinese know. So in my classes in China, I'd say extraterritoriality. Very hard to pronounce. What does it mean? Territory, you know, territory. And extra means outside the territory. So it meant that the foreigners in China had privileges that, as though they were outside of China. They ruled the roost inside their special areas in all over China. Shanghai and Beijing and Guangzhou and Dalian and Yingkou and places you never heard of. I'm not too familiar with some of them either. And those lasted a long time. They lasted, many of them lasted to World War II because foreigners didn't want to give up their privileges, and because China was very chaotic, foreigners were afraid to give up their privileges. And in Hong Kong, there was a special treaty regarding Hong Kong. The treaty lasted until 1997, not so long ago. Now, this is what I mentioned a minute ago, the world's largest economy over 1,000 years, according to this American economist. You know, oops, I don't know about these figures here. You know, these are his estimate of the percentage of the world economy that China represented in AD 1000 up until 1820. That's the Great Wall, by the way. Did you know that, or well enough known, right? Part of the Great Wall. The Great Wall stretches hundreds, thousands of miles. The last dynasty finally fell in 2011, the Qin Dynasty. The Qin means pure, right, Lenny? And it's sort of strange because actually the Qin Dynasty was a foreign dynasty. It wasn't a Chinese dynasty. It was originated in northeast China by a tribe called the Manchus. And they conquered the Chinese dynasty, and they became more Chinese than the Chinese in order to rule. And they espoused Chinese culture and literature and language. These are China was in chaos all these years, and there was rivalry between the KMT, those who study Chinese and see it's the Kuomintang, those characters there. And in the 1920s, the Communist Party, led by Chairman Mao, led by others also, was the rival of the KMT part of the time and cooperated with the KMT part of the time. Why did they cooperate? Well, there was chaos. You know, both leaders wanted China to be restored to its former glory. So there was internal chaos after the fall of the Qin Dynasty. And then in 1931, and something that if you study a little bit of Chinese, you can see it. You studied the numbers in Chinese?
Yes.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is 9. This is 8. It's called the 9/18 incident. I'm particularly familiar with it because I used to be in Shenyang, which is where this incident occurred, where Japanese troops came in and started conquering China, now called the Zhouyiba Shijin. And at that point, again, the Communist Party and the National Party sort of got together to oppose the Japanese. What about the U.S.? The U.S. in the 19th century was the junior partner, but by the 20th century was a more active partner, or more active country in Chinese affairs. And the U.S. actually kind of considered, should we support the KMT or the Chinese Communist Party? And there was something, as you see at the bottom here, called the Dixie Mission. We're here in Dixie, right? South of the Mason-Dixon line, south of the Ohio River is Dixie. The Dixie Mission actually was a group of U.S. Army officers and U.S. Foreign Service officers, that is U.S. diplomats like me, who went over to the communist side during the 1940s and went up to where Mao was in Yan'an, kind of scope them out and see what's going on. Should the U.S. support these people? Should we support the KMT or somehow support both of them? And actually they gave the Communist Party fairly high marks. They weren't as corrupt as the Nationalist Party. But in the long run, the decision was made by the U.S. to support the KMT against the Communist Party. And we did send a lot of military equipment to the KMT, because after World War II ended for us, the Civil War, not Civil War, when World War II ended, the Japanese were defeated, they left China, but the KMT and the Communist Party had a civil war, just as bloody as the U.S. Civil War, and the U.S. supported the KMT in that war. What happened? Well, to make a long story short, the Communist side won, and the KMT fled to Taiwan and set up a government in exile, you could say, in Taiwan. And in China, Chairman Mao famously stood up in Tiananmen, the Gate of Heavenly Peace in Beijing. It's a huge square. Let's see, how huge can we describe that square? I don't know, about maybe 15 football fields, something like that. It's gigantic, larger than Red Square in Moscow. Mao stood up on October 1st, 1949, and I think he said something like, 中国人民共和国起来了. The People's Republic of China has wakened up, has stood up. And when he said that, he's expressing that background I just explained, China's ancient glory, how it led the world for so many thousands of years, and then was in chaos for half a century, and then finally there's a single government in control of China. So he was very, very proud to do that as a Chinese national and also as a communist. Since the U.S. supported the opposing party, the U.S. and China then broke relations. And beyond that, the U.S. and China fought each other in the Korean War. And when that happened, the U.S. also said, we're going to protect Taiwan. China was preparing, the People's Republic of China was preparing its forces to take over, complete their victory in the Civil War. But the U.S. said, we're not going to allow that. We think this is part of a worldwide communist conspiracy by China and the Soviet Union. We're going to protect Taiwan. During the Cold War, let's see, none of you remember the Cold War. Lasted about 50 years. It was hot in Korea, but then it was cold. Initially in the 1950s, Mao said, we're going to support the Soviet Union. We're going to lean to one side, the Soviet side. And the Soviet Union, I don't know if you studied these characters, was called Lao Da Ge. It means big brother. Communism started earlier in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union became China's ally. Mao even said the east wind prevails over the west wind. He's talking about China and Communist bloc prevailing over the Western countries. Dong Feng Hong. In foreign policy, China was encouraging revolution all around the world. They were going out to countries in Africa, in Southeast Asia in particular, not dealing so much with governments. They're trying to set up revolutionary communist parties to overthrow governments around the world. In the economy, they were following the model of the big brother of the Soviet Union, centralized economy. Mao emphasized ideology. Politics was in command. People all around China had a little red book of Mao's sayings. I think the Confucius Institute probably doesn't have those, right? And the students in China would wave these little red books and talk about Mao. Mao set up these things called communes. You see the Chinese at the bottom here, Renmin Gongshe, in the countryside, where people would live essentially in dormitories. They would eat in common cafeterias. There was no family life. This was somehow supposed to support production, and yet it didn't have that effect. I actually visited a commune in 1982, just as they were closing down. My wife is Chinese from Taiwan. We went to a place called the Zhou Family Village Production Brigade. The production brigade was part of the commune. And it was very poor. There was no electricity, there was no water, no running water. This was kind of the result of Chairman Mao's idea that China would go into communes.